All right, so we're going to use our foldable to complete these notes. So example 1 says, underline the hypothesis and circle the conclusion. Then rewrite the conditional statement in if-then form. So example A says, you are in Texas if you are in Houston. All right, so the hypothesis is after the if, you are in Houston. The conclusion is that you are in Texas. It wouldn't make sense to do it the other way around. And the reason this is because if you think about the wording, if you are in Texas, then you are in Houston. That's not true. You could be in Texas and be in Dallas or Austin. So it makes more sense to say, if you are in Houston, then you are in Texas, because that is a true statement. All right, let's look at B. So we need to underline the hypothesis. So the hypothesis is that all 30-degree angles, and the conclusion is they are acute angles. And the reason this is, think about the wording. If you are an acute angle, then do you have to be 30 degrees? What do you think? You don't, because you could be 20 degrees or 70 degrees. Those are all acute angles. But it does make sense to say, if an angle is 30 degrees, then it is an acute angle. That is a true statement. All right, let's look at example 2. So it says, write the negation of each statement. Notice on our foldable, the negation, if you need a reminder, is the opposite of the original statement. So the statement is, the ball is red. So the negation is, the ball is not red. Let's look at example B. It says, the cat is not black. So if you negate that, you don't want to say the cat is not black. That's kind of weird. But remember, it's just the opposite of each statement. So if the cat is not black, the negation or the opposite is the cat is black. What would be the correct negation for the statement, the shirt is green? All right, it would be, the shirt is not green. All right, let's look at example 3. Now, I will just show you this picture again. You've seen it before. I have my foldable taped in, and right here, this part right here, this is actually example 3 from my notes. So personally, I would switch to your notebook and write in example 3 there, because I think it's going to be really handy to refer back to. And remember, the foldables and the things that I've had you put in your notebook can be used on tests. So I'm going to fill in example 3 in the foldable, not actually, in the interactive student notebook, not actually in my notes. So you see where I wrote it on the same page as the foldable, just underneath. So example 1 says, let P be, you are a guitar player, and let Q be, you are a musician. Write each statement in words and decide whether it is true or false. So how I wrote it in my notebook is I wrote conditional, and then I color-coded. I stuck with how we're having blue as our hypothesis. I'll tell you what, I'm going to take that off because we were using pink as our conclusion. So pink is our conclusion, blue is our hypothesis, and I used purple just because it was a neutral color that I hadn't used for anything. So I wrote conditional, and then I personally think, knowing that it's P arrow Q, which we know we say out loud, if P then Q, I found it very helpful to know that in my notes. So I went ahead and color-coded it like that. So now, if I want to write, you are a guitar player, you are a musician, as an if-then statement, I wrote, if you are a guitar player, then you are a musician. And so just to help myself out as I'm trying to remember this, my hypothesis is in blue, and my conclusion is in this pink color. Now it wants to know, is it true? So if you are a guitar player, then you are a musician. That's true. If you play the guitar, then you're some type of a musician. So I think that one's true. So now, like I said, I did this in my notebook. So now I wrote down converse. And then I wrote it's Q arrow P. And we can refer back to our foldable for help as needed. So a converse, if you look at your foldable, it says it's formed by switching the hypothesis and the conclusion. So let's switch it. If you are a musician, then you are a guitar player. Now, is that true or false? I think it's false, because if you are a musician, you could play the piano or play the tuba. You don't necessarily have to be a guitar player to be a musician. So if you are a musician, you could be a guitar player, but you could be something else. So since it's not true for all instances, I'm going to say that one's false. All right, let's do inverse now. All right, so remember the inverse is formed by negating both. We keep the order the same, but we negate each one. So what we're going to say, we're going back to the original order. The original order, P arrow Q, was the top row. The conditional, it said if you are a guitar player, then you are a musician. So now we just have to negate it. So if you are not a guitar player, then you are not a musician. All right, so we want to know if that's true or false. So it is going to be false, and there's two ways I know. First of all, just logic, so just kind of thinking it through. So if you are not a guitar player, I don't play the guitar, but like in high school, I was a percussionist, so I was a form of a musician. So just if you are not a guitar player, you might play the piano. Doesn't mean you're not a musician. You could still be a musician. The other thing I know is in our foldable under equivalent statements, it said the converse and inverse of any conditional statements are equivalent. So that means the converse and inverse will either both be true or will both be false. So since the converse was false, I already knew the inverse was going to be false. Okay, so now last but not least, I wrote down contrapositive. All right, let me just set up so I can color code this. So remember, the contrapositive is found by both switching and negating. So from the original statement, the original, if you are a guitar player, then you are a musician, it is going to switch order and negate. So what we are going to say is, we are going to say, if you are not a musician, so switch order, then you are not a guitar player. Now, that is true, once again, for two reasons. First of all, our foldable on equivalent statement said a conditional and its contrapositive are equivalent. That means they're either both true or both false. So we had decided at the very beginning, if you are a guitar player, then you are a musician was true. So that means this one must be true. So the other thing is just logically thinking about it, is that if you are not a musician, that means you don't have any musical playing an instrument or singing, okay? So you're not a musician, then you can't be a guitar player, you can't be a piano player, you can't play the tuba, you can't play the clarinet. So that's just logic reasoning is another way I can tell. So back to my picture. So I've used example 3 to write below, and that just gives me some more to go off of. Notice that you can see in my sample interactive student notebook, I color coded, I underlined. I'm really using color as a way for my brain to connect things. So that's the beginning of section 2, which we're just getting into logic and reasoning and becoming better thinkers. And we're